Thank you all for joining us for our panel, LA Real Estate Current Reality Future Forecast. In a few moments, we look forward to diving into an intelligent and dynamic discussion. First, we would like to introduce our moderator, the voice of business news in Los Angeles, Frank Mottek. Thank you, Frank, for leading today's panel.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you and our esteemed panel here today to discuss the coronavirus crisis impact on Southern California real estate. And we gratefully acknowledge our sponsor, the San Antonio Winery. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And obviously the crisis impacted all of us, consumers, businesses, and certainly real estate, with home sales plunging in the month of April, I see, and home sales plunging, but home prices holding up pretty well still. So we'll get an update on that very, very shortly. Looks like the recovery is continuing, though. We see mortgage applications actually higher over the past week. Of course, on the rental side, a lot of people having difficulties nowadays with unemployment running at the highest we've seen since the Great Depression. A lot of people having trouble paying their mortgages. So a lot of very, very serious issues impacting real estate here in Southern California at the moment. Let me bring in our first panelist now, Dr. Robert Kleinhenz, economist, Kleinhenz Economics. And Robert, want to get your assessment of things here first of all, and maybe tell us about yourself and your firm here to start things off.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Frank, and thanks for the opportunity to be on the program. Kleinhenz Economics is a small economics firm. I've been in the consulting and business as an economist for about 40 years, mainly with regional economics, forecasting, and real estate analysis. So I track the housing market very closely here in Southern California. And so you want me to give you a quick update on the economy? Is that it there, Frank?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please do,
so,
and with a focus on real estate, of course, and how you see things here at the moment.
So the big story, of course, is the pandemic shutdown. A couple weeks ago, we saw that the unemployment rate at the national level jumped to 14.7%. We're getting a report on Wednesday. I'm sorry, we're getting a report this Friday on California and LA County, at which time we'll probably find that the unemployment rates for the state and for the locale have jumped to double digits as well. So we're in the thick of it right now. April will probably be the worst month in terms of job losses. May will actually be another month of job losses, but we think that we'll turn the corner by then. So the good news ought to be that as we move into the second half of this year, that things will stabilize as far as the economy is concerned. Although, of course, it all depends on how things proceed in terms of recovering from the pandemic and opening up the state of California to business over the next several weeks. But the housing market has really taken a hit. We normally see, for example, that from March to April, there's a big jump in home prices. That didn't happen this year. Home sales, really through the beginning of this year, have lagged last year's home sales level. And last year was nothing to write home about. And we're seeing increasing numbers of listings go delisted, so people are pulling out of the market. So there's a lot of turbulence at this time, but I'm hopeful that as we get maybe another 6 or 8 weeks in, things will stabilize some. Yes, we're seeing some improvement of home sales in some markets. We'll just have to wait and see right now and see how things turn out through these next few weeks.
Robert, let me ask you about the sales numbers. We haven't seen a decline like this in recent memory, down more than 30% in most of the 6 counties here in this region. But prices, though, still holding up pretty well. What do you see ahead on both the sales and the prices here?
Yeah, so prices normally jump at this time of year, especially from March and April. And we're still ahead of last year in terms of home prices when you look at this LA County median. But the jump from March to April wasn't nearly as large as it typically would be. So home prices we expect to hold up a whole lot better than home sales. And so I would not expect to see a lot of bargains. The home prices will continue to hold pretty steady. The softest areas of the market in terms of both home sales and price right now are at the high end over $1 million.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll continue the discussion now with Kurt Northrup, a very prominent realtor with Douglas Elliman realty company here in Southern California. Kurt, thank you very much for jumping on this call here. And first of all, tell us about your background and your firm to set the table for us here.
I've been with Douglas Elliman for about, I would say, 3 or 4 years. They purchased Telus Properties, which was the fastest growing real estate company in Southern California for a number of years in a row. And I've been an agent for about a half dozen years. And then before that, I was in the entertainment business for about 20 years as a producer and as an executive. You know, I got into real estate because I just love the business of it. And, you know, I was also kind of looking after my investments, and then became an expert in kind of the residential development and sales component of it, because I have a lot of clients that are developers, you know, similar to Richard. And, you know, it's interesting what Robert was saying, because, you know, you look at the numbers and it really kind of reflects what the zeitgeist is kind of on the front line. So what I'm seeing is there's actually a decent amount of activity amongst buyers and some sellers, but there's a general lack of confidence that what they're doing is really the right time to be doing it. And I think that's what's really, you know, putting a damper on any activity that we're having, is there's still low supply. There's not enough inventory, especially at the entry level. And like Robert said, it's like, I don't think the pricing is going to change. There may be some adjustments at the higher end, but buyers in general, they just don't feel, no matter what anyone, you know, if I try and tell them or anyone tells them, they're just worried that making a decision like this right now is maybe the wrong time to do it. So they're just leaning back. And until they get a consistent message that it's okay to move forward with activities and with livelihoods and everything else, they're, you know, it's just not very much business going on. That's the problem.
Has it improved? Obviously, this situation is still evolving, but you've been declared essential again, right? Must have been like the Maytag repairman there for a while at the beginning.
Well, you know, I've been through a lot of rubber gloves over the last month and a half, and mask and Purell and all that stuff. And so we have procedures in place so that showing houses is 100% allowed. Given certain circumstances, you has to be only, you know, one agent and 2 members of the same household going in. There can't be someone in the place at the time when you're showing it. So they have, you know, safety precautions in place so that pretty much you can show just about any property you need to. And you can also get that through the process of escrow to close. But what we're seeing is, you know, people are looking for bargains. They're fishing to try and, you know, get something below, whereas the sellers aren't really wanting to give huge discounts, maybe 5 or 10% just to get it done. But, you know, nothing like a fire sale, I think. So, but, you know, it's like a stasis right now. So, you know, the faster we can get out of the stasis, the better we're off we're going to be. But that takes kind of a group effort to say, hey, we're all back for business. Let's go. Let's start getting stuff done. And it's just hard to do that right now.
Thank you, Kurt. And also with us now, a very prominent developer on this call, Richard Loring, who is working on the Domos Rossmore project at the moment, which is a co-living design project. So Richard, yourself and your firm and about the project that you're working on here.
Frank, and wanted to thank the other panelists. So I've been with Domos Rossmore for about 2 years, and we are a co-living company. The project that I'm working on currently is over on Rossmore, 410 North Rossmore. And it's an existing building. It was built back in the 30s, and our program is to totally renovate the building, including seismic upgrades, life safety upgrades, adding at least 3 additional stories. And then when we're complete, we should be anywhere from 25 to 50% co-living. The rest of the units will be traditional apartments. There will also be significant number of 1-bedroom units that current residents will be able to move back into, relocate back into, if they want. So in terms of what we've seen so far is we've seen a lot of slowdown in the entitlements process. You know, you can't meet with architects or engineers anymore. You can't meet with builders. You can't have testing agencies come out onto the site. So a lot of the things that you would normally be doing during early entitlements, we're not able to do them as effectively. So we're still able to do business, but it's a lot slower. Definitely not nearly as efficient. My background is architectural construction and development, and I've been doing those three things for 40 years. And so I've been through a number of cycles, and this one is certainly the strangest of them all so far, because it's not really caused by any sort of business dislocation or economic dislocation. It's caused by a pandemic. And so it's just very, very different than other cycles that I've been through. And, we have 55 residents in the building, and those residents are, very worried about not just their jobs, but they're also worried about their health. So to Kurt's point, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety out there. And I'm not working with people at the top end of the economic scale. I'm working with people that are median income, and there's a tremendous amount of anxiety. And so it's very difficult for them to make decisions now. They're wanting to delay decisions or put decisions off as long as they can. So.
And you're at the forefront of something that was getting a lot of attention earlier this year, the co-living arrangement. Tell us about what that means in that building, and how this is going to address housing affordability and what you're doing there, please.
Okay, well, first of all, co-living is a relatively new field, but it's also a very broad field. So there are a lot of different types of co-living models out there. The model that we're pursuing involves apartments essentially with 4 or 5 bedrooms. So in that sense, a typical situation would be somewhat similar to a family home with, 3 or 4 bedrooms, same number of occupants, basically. So we think that over time, people will, as they adjust to this new reality, there'll be less reason for them to avoid a co-living situation. The reality, another reality is that according to the Census Bureau, overcrowding is defined as 1 person per room, and we're definitely below that threshold because we have living areas and cooking areas, that count as rooms, but we're not adding additional people to the mix. So we're not going to have overcrowded units, Frank. The units that we do have in the co-living part of the development, the price points will be very attractive. They'll be 10-15% discount to studio apartments in the area, in the immediate area, and anywhere from 20 to 25% below the price for 1-bedroom units in the area. So there's a distinct competitive advantage in terms of price point for co-living. We're still seeing a pretty good response on other projects of ours in terms of people coming in and wanting to virtually look at units. So there's still a high level of interest in renting within a co-living environment.
Very interesting. And we also have a prominent designer on the call as well, Paul McClean from Architectural Lens. Paul, tell us how you've been impacted by all of this, and tell us a bit about yourself and your firm here, first of all.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks, panelists. I'm glad to be on today. It's been a very strange and interesting time. I couldn't agree with what the other panelists are saying more. For us, we're very fortunate. We do high-end luxury homes. We've been doing this for about 20 years now, mixture of homes that are for sale. And at the moment, nearly all our projects are for homeowners. And that's been going on for a couple of years. I think we crested the top of the speculative luxury market a couple of years back. And we enjoy doing the projects with homeowners, I think, more because, we can have that relationship with them. But it's the strangest time in 20 years. And we feel very fortunate that we were able to switch to working from home successfully as an office. We're 10 people in our office, and we will be transitioning slowly back. We miss the collaborative nature of working together. Even though we have great opportunities like this, it's still not quite the same and not as efficient. But we're seeing a mixture of things with our clients. So a lot of optimism. Our clients are mainly Southern California. We also have clients around the world. The clients abroad have been relatively unaffected. A lot depends on the stage of the project. Some of our projects are in construction and they're all just moving forward. People have already invested in those projects and made those decisions, so there's nothing to stop them moving forward. We've had 2 or 3 projects that have gone on hold, mainly because the people we were doing them for are in situations where they're running businesses and they're having to furlough people or let them go, and there's just a general discomfort about the idea of spending, you know, large sums of money on their own projects when so many people are in such less fortunate situations. So, but generally, we're seeing a lot of projects moving forward still, because is planning and drawing, and you know, those are things that we can do while this is going on, and the work needs to happen at some point. Just like Richard said, having a lot of trouble getting things approved. It's a much slower process. It's hard to get to the people to make decisions and get them to make decisions. So that's slowing things down. But I think for us as a whole, the real question is what comes next, not what's happening right now. This is like a hiatus, a hold. What are we going to see the economy like in 6 months from now? Are we going to be in such a deep recession that people decide not to move forward with projects? Or are we going to be in a situation people are anxious to get back to normality and really push? I think one thing that we never talk about often enough perhaps is the human interaction that we're all missing. Being in a room with people, you know, having conspiratorial conversations ear to ear and close together, shaking people's hands and so on. And I personally am very optimistic that, you know, we will all get back to that, and people will be trying very hard to make the best of things, to make things move again. And just as a last point for now, I think there's a difference between this, and like Richard said, I'm old enough to have been through a few cycles. We've had our firm for over 20 years. This is different. This is like a sideways hit that hit the entire planet. And I think people will be anxious. They're not lacking confidence in the fundamentals of the market and what's going on. And they're anxious about what's ahead. But if we all collectively are optimistic going forward, I think we will see things come back relatively quickly, and people will be anxious to try and get back to a sense of normality and try and improve things. I know some of those clients that we've been working with that put projects on hold, once they start rehiring their staff, they'll go straight back and start those projects up again, because that will be good for the economy and will help everything to move forward. So it's a little bit different than, say, the last recession where everyone wasn't sure what the situation financially was going to be. And so we'll just have to see.
Are you feeling the recovery is underway now? And I see you've been keeping yourself busy chopping wood. We see your handiwork back there. So
yeah,
you look like you're very, very busy. So,
I'm getting ready for the long winter.
Very, very good.
In Southern California.
A quick snap back here. V-shaped recovery.
No, I don't think a V-shaped recovery. I think a slow, steady climb to normality. I think that it's going to be hard for people, because the economy is going to open up in stages. It's hard for people to get confident enough. Many people, I think, will not be confident for a long time. Some people will be anxious to get out there and do things. Other people will just want to stay home. So, you know, it's going to be a complicated process going back. But I think one thing to remember is that, you know, the fundamentals of a lot of the parts of the economy were good before this started. It's very different from 2008, where there were all sorts of things out of sync in the economy. And so if we can get back to thinking like that as the pandemic runs its course and people get back to their normal lives, I think they're going to resume more business. I also think people are very quick to forget. And I have a feeling that, you know, once you make that first step out to that first restaurant, then it'll be different the next week. And then people will very quickly move back into that part of their life, I hope. But again, that's all predicated on no more outbursts of, you know, virus. And, you know, that could be the worst thing, I think, of all, if we have a big outburst in the fall and we all just fall back again. It's going to be very hard to introduce another strong quarantine like this. And if I could say one more optimistic thing, I don't know how the rest of the panel feels, but this worked. I mean, I think I have some friends who are nurses and doctors. They're all getting back to normal. They're sitting in empty hospitals waiting for patients. I mean, that was the point. We stay home, we make sure we flatten the curve. It happened. And so that's great news. I think it's very easy. There's a lot of blame going around and people being upset and whatever. But, you know, the fact that we're not inundated with people who are sick, and it's very sad for the people who have been ill and people who have died, but the numbers are not as severe as they could have been, especially here in California. I think we've done a pretty good job with our stay at home compared to in other places.
Turning back to Dr. Kleinhenz now, who's much too modest, one of the most prominent economists in California, certainly, and former chief economist of the LA EDC, and we've done many, many forums over the years, Robert, including during the financial crisis. And let me ask that question to you now. How do you see this recovery if you were to put it up on a chart? Is it going to be a V-shaped, a U, or might we have a resurgence in cases of a possible W? How do you see this recovery playing out?
So Frank, everything depends on whether or not we see the resurgence that may be in the offing. And I've been reading that we may see a spike later on in the fall. So once we reopen, you know, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to be able to shut down like this again. So hopefully all the cautionary moves that we've taken and the protocols that are going to be in place over the next few months will enable us to move forward. I agree with Paul. We're going to move forward slowly, not a V-shaped recovery, more like a Nike swoosh. And so the couple of things I think are worth mentioning at this point about this economic circumstance we find ourselves in. We basically pressed the pause button on the economy, much like Paul was saying. The economy was doing fine in the first part of the year leading up to about mid-March. And then we had this shutdown. Housing was not doing great, but it was moving along. Household finances were in very good shape and have been over the last several years. Any number of indicators when you look at the economy suggest that the economy was doing fine. Of course, we had a record long expansion that we were in the midst of as all of this occurred. This is nothing like the Great Recession. It's not at all like the Great Depression. Big cuts have occurred in jobs. We saw GDP fall sharply in the first quarter of this year. But when you compare it to recessions, recessions are measured in many quarters of economic downturn. When you compare to a depression, you're looking at many years of economic downturn, many years of elevated unemployment rates. Yes, we've got a big problem right now, but our recovery ought to start in the second half of this year. It may take us until the end of next year to recoup all the GDP, all the economic activity that we lost. And the labor market and job growth recovery will follow. So we're probably looking into 2022 before we get close to unemployment rates that we've seen in recent months. Let's keep in mind that we've been at record low unemployment rate here in California and Los Angeles County for several months running. To get back to this point, or to the point where we were before all this happened, is going to take some doing. But I think we'll be on a good footing by the time we get to this point next year and well into the second half of next year. And I really do think that we'll be turning the corner in terms of seeing the negatives turn to positives as we move into the second half of this year.
As you've noted, we went from a 50-year low in unemployment to an 80-year high all of a sudden. Yeah. And certainly traditionally, the job picture has been extremely, if not the number one factor for real estate. So with so many people out of work, and yes, we have a lot of government programs and people are collecting unemployment and so forth, but people are really struggling, especially to pay their mortgages and their rent, certainly. So a lot of people think that I've talked to that home prices will come under pressure, and so will rents as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Many different directions we could go with that. The government, the Congress passed bills that authorized about $3.3 trillion of support to different parts of our economy, including about $800 billion to households and an equivalent amount to small businesses. These are good financial backstops to enable households and businesses to maintain some level of purchasing power. But when you look at people who are buying homes in Southern California, especially in LA County, this is a pricey part of the world. So it's not your typical household that's buying a house here. You're looking at people who tend to have higher incomes, above average incomes, tend to be educated. They have jobs that were less likely to be lost or to be in situations where they were put on furlough or laid off temporarily. So there are a lot of things that when you peel back the onion behind the high level observations that support a possible recovery in housing, because these kinds of things make a difference. People who are buying homes, even first-time buyers in LA County, oftentimes are older, have more established jobs, better incomes, and so it's worth noting that the lion's share of the job losses that occurred were in the restaurant industry. Not so much in many other industries, including financial services, professional services. Information, that is to say motion picture and sound recording, has taken a big hit. But based on national numbers, most of the people who were laid off envisioned that these are temporary layoffs and they're going to get back to work. So this is a difficult stretch that we're in right now for real estate. And we're not going to have a banner year by any means here in 2020 in real estate. But if we can get some forward momentum in the next few weeks, I think that will be encouraging.
Certainly one of the industries that has driven the high-end market here in this area is the entertainment industry, right, which still is flat on its back here at the moment, with production pretty much non-existent as we speak. So Kurt, let me bring you in on this one, since you have a background in the entertainment industry and friends in the industry. What buzz are you hearing about those jobs going away, at least temporarily, and its impact on your business nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, well, everybody's been kind of working from home, and in terms of, you know, the discussions about creative and moving forward with projects, I mean, all those discussions can still take place. But I am aware of, like, you know, producers and executives in charge of production and directors, when they get back, they're going like, how do we do this? How do we use a control booth? You know, how do we use a stage? Like, you know, there's no protocols, and this is a very fluid business that needs to shoot on a shoestring budget most of the time. So they are going to have to figure out how do they make that work with the restrictions. I think that's going to be a challenge. And, you know, the large corporations will always take this as an opportunity to try and trim the fat and make their bottom line look as good as possible. Really, the independents that, you know, are going to suffer long time, because if they go away, they may not come back. You know, they're always been kind of on the fringe anyway. So, you know, it's hard for them. But, you know, it's hard to know. And also, taking it back to real estate, you know, we're looking at somewhere between a 15 to 20% unemployment rate, you know, which means it's probably consistent with the failures on rents, and mortgages are also around 15 to 20%, I would think. So, you know, I think that until those realities become kind of rubber hits the road, we don't really know. I'm not seeing the distressed sales or the foreclosure sales yet, but they may be coming. So timing is going to be a big deal over the next 2-3 months, because now we're into it, 2-3 months? Banks will forgive, you know, 2-3 months, sometimes 4. But once you start getting into 5 or 6 months, then it's a question of, are they all going to be able to forgive these? You know, what part of these, you know, situations were maybe, you know, existed before, where the people were struggling, and now all of a sudden it's exacerbated that. But like I said, in a way, I would like to see some of that happening, because it would move the market. Right now, it's just like in stasis, like it needs a big kick in the butt. And that means everybody's saying, hey, everybody's open for business. You know, things aren't going to change. Let's go. And, you know, watching people around them buy and sell property, people would do it. But right now, no one wants to be the first lamb out of the herd.
If I could just add for a second, you know, coming into this situation, households were really well positioned financially. Their debt to income ratios, their debt servicing ratios were quite good. So if in the back of our minds we're wondering, well, are we going to be looking at another financial crisis and a mortgage meltdown, the likes of which we saw back in 2008, 2009? The answer should be no. We're not going to be looking at large numbers of people who are losing their homes. There are a lot of homeowners who in this cycle built up equity, both out of caution and out of lender restrictions. They didn't use their homes as piggy banks the way they did in the last economic cycle. And so, excuse me, we should be weathering this much better as homeowners in this cycle compared to what we saw before. Excuse me.
Kurt, what kind of recovery do you expect? Is it going to be a V or a U, or what are you bracing for at this point, Kurt?
Yeah, I think Robert's probably right. I mean, there's not enough consumer confidence to have it be a V. If they could literally open the doors and say, no one needs a mask, no one needs gloves, just go do whatever you want, I think we could get to a V. But I just don't see that. People, the media and the politicians have scared the crap out of everybody. They're all going to die from this thing. There's so many people that are hunkered inside that just, they're not going to change even when this is over. I mean, this has been traumatic for them. And I think even the experiences of people staying at home, and being shut in, whether they have families or not, that's been a very psychologically jarring experience for people. I don't think people are going to be the same after this. So I think it's going to take them a while to jump back in and go do what they normally would.
And of course, housing affordability was a big issue even before this situation came up. So let me bring in Richard Loring now, who's involved multifamily and close to the renters out there. Tell us what's happening in the real world out there, Richard. Are people not paying the rent? We see a very significant number reported not to be at this point because they just can't do it because of a lack of income. Tell us what's happening on the rental side.
Well, I think what we have is kind of a tale of two cities, Frank. I understand at the higher ends of the market, people are more resilient. They're able to be more resilient. But when you get down into the median income range and you start to look at folks that are renting in that range, when they lose their jobs, they don't have, generally speaking, they don't have a lot of savings to fall back on. So as we come out of the pandemic, these folks are going to come out of the pandemic indebted, a lot more deeply in debt than they were before. And I personally think, it's going to be a very slow recovery just in terms of my exposure to the rental market. And we have people in our buildings that are unable to pay rent. And the city of Los Angeles, as everybody knows, has instituted a rent deferral program. And just recently, within the last week or so, they instituted a no doc program. In other words, you don't need any kind of documentation at all to go into a rent deferral program. So there will be more people going into a rent deferral program. That's going to put a lot of pressure all the way up the food chain. So, our affordability problem, Frank, is not going anywhere. We still have the same density in terms of population. We still have the same lack of median income and low income housing. Developers for the last 10 years, they've been building luxury housing and luxury apartments, period. There's been almost no product coming online that's geared or aimed for people in the median income range. So I'm not nearly as optimistic as the rest of the panel, but maybe that's really just because of my exposure to the part of the market that I'm focused on. So I'm hearing very different stories out there. And in terms of the entertainment industry, I was listening very carefully, Kurt, to what you were saying. And for instance, the people that I'm coming in contact with, the renters, they're not executives, they're not producers, they're on the line, and they're the production is completely shut down, and nobody knows when it's going to start again. So I'm not that optimistic, guys.
I mean,
I see something different out there than the rest of the panel.
Streaming so much content at home that it is encouraging for all of the different OTT distributors to go, wow, if we just produce it, it'll get watched because there's so many people consuming content. But they're not there yet. There's a gap between what they need to do and what they want to do on a logistical basis. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, what they're
in discussing the entertainment industry, I used to joke to all the waiters and waitresses out there. I mean, actors and actresses. No matter where you look, people are being affected nowadays. So Richard, what do you see ahead on rents? Are they coming down here?
My information is anecdotal, and I have talk to people in LA that say rents are coming down. We have people in our company that live in New York. They're saying rents are coming down, in some cases by 30%. Ditto in Atlanta. So I think the rental market's going to be severely impacted. I think the severe part of the impact will be relatively short term. And as people are able to go back to work, I think rents will start to climb again. But I just think it's going to be a while. And, you know, Robert, to your point, we're all betting on no second wave.
Right.
That's a big bet to make.
That's correct.
It's a huge bet. And, but it is the bet right now. That's what everybody's hoping for.
I think if we look at the, our experience after 9/11, especially with respect to tourism and transportation, we saw that it took quite a long time for people to feel comfortable about doing things that they used to think nothing of doing before, getting on a plane, going to a conference, stuff like that. It took years for passenger counts to return to where they were prior to 9/11. So certain parts of our economy are going to take a while to recover. And I agree with you, Richard. The rental side of the market is going to take longer to recover. It's the these backstops that are provided by these government programs that hopefully will soften the blow and enable these households to get back on their feet more quickly. But it's going to be a more difficult road for many of those households. I totally agree.
One other important point we should bring up related to health. Richard, let me ask you about this and see if it's happening in your building, but obviously with health being the number one concern, what about the traditional roommate situations here? Are people having second thoughts about that and living with someone they may not know well, or what are you hearing about that?
Yeah, we certainly, you know, I'm in touch with several large co-living operators, and they did indicate in the first 2 or 3 weeks, they saw a significant drop in interest, in pings, if you will. They weren't getting people interested in viewing units. We're talking about online viewings, not in person. So they saw a real drop for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, the last 2 or 3 weeks, they said that volume has increased again. So people now are reaching out to them, you know, virtually touring units, showing some interest in renting again. So I think the idea that in some way co-living is far less healthy than a 3 or 4 bedroom home, I think that's overblown, Frank, but it's going to take a while for that to subside. You know, when a rumor starts, the rumor doesn't just go away immediately. It takes a while to circulate out of the system. So I think we'll continue to see some of that in the co-living sector, but I think overall, I think we'll be, you know, our volume of business, I think will mimic or follow the traditional rental market. That's what I think.
And Paul, looking to the future here, obviously with technology playing a big role in our lives, a bigger role than ever, and obviously with the health concerns from a design standpoint, what are people expected to demand at this point?
God, I think we're all going to be looking for better ways to work from home, right? I think we found across our client group and even in our own other consultants we work with that a lot of people are happy working from home. And these are the more fortunate people compared to people that Richard is talking about, especially the people who enjoy the extra time they have in the day because they don't have a commute anymore and they can do yoga instead or something because they still have a job. But even still, you know, it's a pressure. People live in traditional homes or share with other roommates, whatever. Like, how do you work from home successfully? There are lots of anecdotal stories about that. So we did find that all of our clients with an uptick in talking about how do we manage people coming to the house? How do we manage clients coming to the house, for example, which we're not doing right now, but thinking ahead, that perhaps working at home is a more attractive option than working in the office, or maybe it's going to be split. Maybe you'll spend 2 days a week at home versus 5 days out of the house. So I think we're going to definitely see an interest in that. And I think that's going to be permanent. And I think what this pandemic does, like many things, it accelerates some trends that are already there. For example, if we were very fortunate, I think that this happened now and not 10 years ago, because we wouldn't be on this panel right now. But that's all, we've all learned that it is possible to do virtual meetings. I think there's been the technology to do it for quite a long time now in terms of technological terms, but we have resisted. But now that we've all got used to this, it's become another tool in our methodology of working. So people are going to be a lot more comfortable working from home. I think that's one of the biggest things that will come out of this.
Well, there will continue to be commutes. The commute will be from the coffee pot to the living room. So there's your commute there, and that's going to impact things here. Yeah, so people will probably not have to live close to work anymore, right? Which is the number one consideration for most people. Where do they work and where do they live? So Robert, what about that? Are we going to see some of the traditionally expensive places coming down possibly for that reason alone?
Well, I mean, we have such a shortage of housing in LA, as Richard pointed out, really, and at so many price levels. I'm not sure that this change, first of all, I'm not convinced that we'll have a permanent and widespread change in behavior if you look, say, 5 years out. Let's say we avoid another flare-up and we get another year into this and we find a vaccine. So now the coast is clear, we can put our masks away and all of our PPEs can go into the closet. Then what's it going to look like? Are we going to resume face-to-face meetings? Are we going to find that the collaborative aspect of being in the same room together will trump the convenience and other benefits of this type of arrangement that we're in right now? I think the answer is going to be yes. And again, I'm looking back at what happened at 9/11 and found that it took a while, but people resumed their habits. And there's no substitute for face-to-face interaction and collaboration. This is a close substitute, but for a lot of activities, it's just not the same. And admittedly, you know, you look at individual industries, Paul, you mentioned this, there were already industries that were, and occupations that were moving toward remote or work at home kind of arrangements long before this. And this is simply going to accelerate things in those areas. And it might, you know, lead people in other industries to think about doing more of this in the future. But the stuff that Paul and Richard and I do that oftentimes require getting into a room with either clients or with coworkers to iron things out. Same with you, Kurt. You know, that sort of thing. We're going to want to have our conference rooms, and our coffee pots, and our donuts when the time comes. But it could be a while.
Yeah. So, Kurt, let me ask you: with these new toys that we're playing on here right now, and the commutes are maybe not like what we used to see in the past, how do you think that'll impact, for example, downtown LA real estate, which the attraction there primarily is people want to live close to work, close to their offices there. What kind of trends, if any, are you picking up at this point?
Well, I mean, I think we're still kind of in stasis. I mean, the overbuilt the downtown apartment supply a little bit. That's the one place in Los Angeles that has extra units because they kind of overdeveloped it. But I mean, I do a lot of activity in West Hollywood, and there's still a really high demand to be in the center of the city. It's not just the commute, but it's also the lifestyle that it grants you, being close to the things that you enjoy, whether it's sophisticated food or, you know, eventually we'll have restaurants back and nightlife and all those things. But I mean, living on a walking street in West Hollywood or in Brentwood, Santa Monica, Hancock Park, Larchmont, whatever, that still has a big cachet. You know, I mean, that's about living in Los Angeles. So I don't think, even when we get back, limited traffic is still going to dominate. And it's going to be, even with, if we lose some people to other states, you know, we're still going to have a density issue with traffic. So it's still, location is going to be the number one driving, you know, characteristic for valuing real estate. I don't think that's going to change, but it's just a question of whether businesses are allowing people to work from home. You're going to see them, like, you know, going to be more in the valley. You know what I mean? It's not like they're going to be super far away. They're just might be a little bit farther away, save that extra 25%, keep their overhead low. Because like you said, it's the people who are, you know, independent contractors in the entertainment business that really get hammered. The people that, you know, work a gig for 6 months and then they don't have a gig for 3 or 4 months. They're just in a wasteland right now. So they needed, you know, that low end of, you know, say $2,500 to $4,500 a month, and maybe even lower of rental rate. I think it's going to get compressed. All the things at the low end are going to get taken, you know, pretty quickly. And then there's going to be this mid-range that's going to be a little bit maybe more open, say 4,000 to say 7,000 a month, where you're going to see a little bit of more availability. But yeah, I don't see it changing as far as location. I think that, you know, people still want to live close to where they work. You know, I still want to go into work. I mean, as much as we're talking about the new normal, I don't want to give up on meeting people and having drinks and coffees. And, you know, that's where most stuff gets done.
Richard, let me ask you about this. Do you see changes in habits here in Southern California based on commuting and being able to work from home? Anything else that you're hearing about in your buildings there?
Well, you know, I'll bet everybody on this panel has enjoyed, when they do get out, has enjoyed the lack of congestion on the freeways. And everybody I talk to has enjoyed that. So I think people have gotten a taste of what, you know, life looks like if you decrease the amount of time that you're spending in your car. So I suspect that is going to be a lasting effect. And you know, so our response is to kind of focus on making the home an easier place to work from. So we're now talking a lot about, you know, how do you do that? What features do we need to add to make a home office a better place to work from? Also, people are cooped up in their apartments. How do you get them out of their apartments when you're in the middle of a pandemic? You know, does that mean more balconies? Does that mean, you know, a kind of a more, you know, robust amenity area on a roof of a building? You know, there will be some design responses to this at every level, not just at the high end level, but there'll be design responses all the way downstream. People are also, I could tell you a really interesting story. We're having a real problem with the buttons in the elevator. People are not touching the buttons, they're kicking the buttons, or they're poking the buttons with their elbows, and they're breaking the buttons. People are going to want to be able to control their environment without touching things. They're going to want to be able to get into the front door of a building without touching anything. There's going to be more automatic doors. You'll be able to control it with your phone. Ditto for appliances, ditto for elevators. I think that's all coming down the pike. It was coming down the pike anyway, and I think now it's going to be accelerated because of the effects of the pandemic, the psychological effects of the pandemic.
Wow. So Paul, the designer here, yeah, are you integrating Alexa in the elevator or other innovations that we might see in the future here?
I think we've all touched on something similar, that it's an acceleration of existing trends. It's like there's been talk for a few years now that we're going to get driverless cars, and then people will be able to live in Temecula and commute to Los Angeles and stuff. And, you know, the reality is not going to be, people are still going to want to live in Bel Air or Beverly Hills if they can afford it. That's not going to change. So I think all of these things are small incremental changes that we will see that will get added to our lives. But maybe the positive that comes out of it is that we have more tools and we're more aware of things like hygiene and so on that will help to make it safer for everybody and to have less problems, and maybe we'll be more prepared for future events. I mean, we in this particular state, we seem to often, you know, drift from one disaster to the next. If it's not fires, it's the mudslides, and, you know, so I mean, we learned to cope with those things, the earthquakes. We have rules for how you deal with those that make us feel safer and help us navigate those scenarios. So hopefully we will learn to design our houses a little bit better, and to incorporate technologies that will be a little bit more reliant in these type of situations.
Robert, are you kicking the elevator? What are you doing?
Take the
Try not to kick the elevator.
No.
But as I was listening to both of you, I was thinking about what it would have been like if this had happened, say, 20 years ago. I mean, we already talked about the fact that we wouldn't have had the convenience of Zoom and other kinds of video conferencing tools to use to enable us to work at home. But you go to a grocery store today, you do not have to touch the door to push it open if it's a typical grocery store. Any number of things, washrooms and so on, are already hands-free. So I can only imagine what the situation might be like today if we didn't already have some of these things in place. And I definitely agree that, you know, that those might not be typical of a house, more typical of a commercial property.
Yeah.
But you're right, the commercial environment, but they're going to become more and more features of homes, especially new homes that are being built. And I know that some Southern California developers and so on are already talking about how the home of the future is going to incorporate, you know, better office space configurations and all these other technologies that will enable individuals to be able to deal with things like the pandemic more effectively.
Maybe more ultraviolet light and that sort of thing as well. Let me ask Kurt, on the lending side, how are things looking? We've been hearing that lenders are already starting to pull back. There's some issues with the jumbo mortgages and so forth, and obviously millions of people now in these forbearance agreements. So on the lending side, what's happening out there, Kurt?
Well, I just did an IG Live with a regional manager for First Republic, and we were talking about how all the banks listen, banks never want to lose money, right? So what they're doing is they're pulling back their loan to value ratios so that they're insulating themselves against a potential dip in the value of the property. So they're asking for, instead of 20% down, 25, 30, 35% down. They don't want to do jumbo loans anymore. They don't want to do home equity lines of credit anymore. They're just basically saying, listen, we'll still give you money. We're still going to be doing diligent underwriting, and we're going to be checking in with these people, diligently, but they're doing it on a very conservative basis. So you can still get a loan. It's a little trickier above 4 million because they want to make sure you have cash and collateral, and they're rechecking, and people's stock market accounts have been hit. People don't have the income. So they're really diligent about making sure that they're giving money to people that can actually afford to take that loan. So they're not panicking. They've kind of come through the other side of the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA loans. Right. The majority of that stuff has been accounted for. There's still a little bit left. So they were just doing that for a while, and now they're back to refinances and things like that, because the rates are still very low on the 30-year fixed.
So Robert, do you think that the banks are going to be able to weather this? And what do you see ahead for lending and for the financial part of all this?
Well, I do have friends in the banking industry. They'll figure out a way to make money. You just mentioned that interest rates are so low. So, and these are long. I think we need to remind ourselves that real estate decisions are long-term decisions. Construction, for example, these were things that were in the pipeline or already running. So, nobody wants to turn off the spigot with that. With respect to the low interest rates that we're looking at right now, they might be lean from a banker's perspective, but they're great opportunities for people who either want to refi or can become homeowners. But I think that they're very conservative at the present time in terms of their lending practices. I've also heard the same, that HELOCs, cash out refis, these kinds of things just are being very carefully scrutinized, or they're being eliminated from the product line altogether for the time being. So the lending industry has, rounded up their horses, and they're going to proceed very carefully. They have the Great Recession and the mortgage meltdown in their memories, and they're going to proceed carefully. Having said that, I feel as though in the last economic cycle, in part, the reason we didn't see housing take off is because of very conservative lending practices on the part of the banking industry. And I think that's going to be a problem once again. I worry that they're being extra conservative for good reason, but that's also going to limit our ability to come out of this with any kind of speed.
A lot of unknowns here as we continue to live in this unprecedented time. As we wrap up our discussion here, let me ask each of you, what is the best case and what is the worst case scenario in real estate as this crisis continues? Richard, let me put that question to you first here, please.
I'll start with the best case because I'd rather not think about the worst case. You know, the best case scenario is that we don't have another large outbreak, that the pandemic is kept essentially under control, and that very, very slowly economic activity will return to normal. You know, I don't know what that timeline looks like. I think it's going to be more than a year myself. And in that scenario, you know, rental rates will recover, you know, housing prices will firm up, people will be willing to go out and, you know, buy and sell homes again or sign new rental agreements. Worst case scenario, of course, is that, you know, the pandemic isn't under control, you know, 6 months from now, and that we have to impose the restrictions again, economic restrictions, which would be, you know, absolutely devastating. As devastating as this has been, I think a second round would really be that much tougher. So,
Paul McClean, best and worst case scenario from your point of view.
I think Richard spelled it out perfectly, especially on the worst case scenario. I completely agree with that. I think one perhaps advantage, which we kind of alluded to earlier, is that the best case scenario could be more enthusiastic than you would normally see coming out of a recession or depression, because the circumstances are so different. There could be almost a patriotic worldwide duty to try and get back to business, which could encourage people to be much more forward thinking that they would perhaps be in a normal kind of recession situation where it takes a lot longer. That would be the best case, that people get excited about return to normality and they want to spend money in the same way that people in a little way have been spending money on takeout to keep their favorite restaurants going. It's just like, let's just spend money to get this going again. That would be the best scenario.
And Kurt, you look like you're the most enthusiastic of all of us to get out there. I think you're standing and you're ready to roll here. So best and worst case scenario, please.
Well, I guess the worst case scenario is some sort of second wave or a COVID-20 type scenario where we could be just coming out and suddenly we go back to worse than we were before, or something, you know, with regards to the mortgages and the people failing on that side. But I just don't see there's enough critical mass for that. I mean, I think that, you know, Paul had a great idea. I mean, I think we've got an election year. This is a great time for whoever gets elected to kind of take that momentum and create kind of a works progress administration type of initiative with, you know, let's get America back to work, and come up with ways that they could subsidize tax cuts for restaurants and small businesses, and, you know, tax credits for purchasing real estate or development in real estate would be great. If they could just give tax credit for developers to do low to mid income housing, oh my God, that would change the whole landscape. We just lost Frank. So I guess that's it. I can talk about it.
Nope.
There we go.
I'm back. Oh no. No, thank you for that, Kurt. And Dr. Robert Kleinhenz, the best and worst case scenario as we conclude our discussion here, please.
Well, I think the worst case scenario is that we have a resurgence and that it happens just as things are really opening up. Because as we've spoken previously, there's really no way of putting this genie back in the bottle once we open up the California economy. The best case scenario, I think, should lead us to think about the fact that we're here in California, that we have been in the lead in terms of protocols for safe at home, social distancing and the like. And I think that if there's an area of the United States where we have an opportunity and a hope to come out of this ahead of some of the other parts of the country, I think that we should be able to do that here in California, because we've been pretty good about maintaining these kinds of protocols going forward. Now, in terms of the best case, you know, the best case was we find a vaccine tomorrow. That's not going to happen. We're hearing some promising, at least promising news about, you know, diagnostic abilities, which will also help us to figure out how to adapt. But I really think that the best case scenario is something that includes a recovery, as I've said earlier, in economic output, so GDP at the national level, maybe by year end next year. So this is not, I'm not super optimistic. I'm just saying, you know, this is kind of a realistic time path with the pain that we felt in the labor market easing as we grow over the next several quarters, but the unemployment rates and job counts really won't recover until further into the decade, 2022. And that's not unlike what we saw in this last Great Recession, except I think that the timeline is going to be a bit shorter. I think it's going to be more like an average recovery period for a typical recession, which is faster than the Great Recession, much faster than the Great Depression. There's just no comparison whatsoever, but it's going to take time.
And one thing that hasn't changed for Southern California real estate, which everybody knows, is that all real estate in Southern California is free. What you pay for is the weather. So hopefully we'll be able to get out there and enjoy more of it at this beautiful time of the year. Well, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time today. Dr. Robert Kleinhenz, Kleinhenz Economics, Kurt Northrup with Douglas Elliman Realty, Richard Loring with Domos Rossmoor on Rossmoor, a great developer in this area, and Paul McClean, founder of McClean Design. Thank you very, very much for your time today. Hope everybody enjoyed the presentation, and we wish everyone all the best, good health, and stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to reconvene again very, very soon. Thank you, and wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.